100 presidents, 3 higher education authors, countless insights. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education through the eyes of 100 plus college and university presidents, is available now on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Of course, by now you know that Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available for purchase. Yes, on Amazon. Yes, in bulk order. And you can do that by contacting me or my beautiful co-author, Kate Colbert. We have been getting, and I want to just say thank you to the audience and those of you that bought the book and are reading it. We've gotten pretty incredible, I mean, more than incredible feedback from those of you that have purchased and have started reading. The social media posts on LinkedIn in particular are amazing. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And we do know, and we have somebody here. Well, the first person we have here is my co-author, Kate Colbert. Kate, how are you today?
Oh, I am unbelievably good. I'm in the after book release sort of nirvana. So all is right with the world.
Speaking of nirvana, I have brought with us today, Kate. Now that the book is out, I feel like we could be interviewed about the book.
Heck yeah.
So I brought along somebody today that is a fairly good interviewer. He's becoming a better podcaster. I've been teaching him everything I know. Some of it doesn't stick. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, the guru of online learning, Dr. Bill Pepicello. Bill, what's going on?
Hey, Joe. It's good to be here with you, and I'll try to employ some of the many things that you have taught me during this interview today.
Well, thank you, Bill, for doing this. And of course, you can check out EdUp Insights with host Dr. Bill Pepicello, wherever you get your podcast. And Bill, you're going to bring some insights along with you today, or at least you're going to ask us for insight about the book, right? And I'm just going to hand it to you.
Great. Yeah, I am indeed. And those of you who do listen to my podcast, you'll be able to hear some of my follow-up, because I'm going to steal a lot of stuff out of this book and pretend it was mine when I do my own podcast.
Go for it.
As Joe and Kate know, I had access to some of the pre-publication pieces. And then when I got the Kindle version, sat down and went through it immediately. And Joe asked me if I'd like to participate in this little activity here. And I said, well, I would, except that I don't think that one episode of interviewing you guys is going to do it, because as I told Joe, I was about halfway through the book and I already had 4 or 5 pages of notes. So with any luck, this will be the first episode in a few episodes that will cover a number of topics in the book, related to the book, and whatever I feel like, because I'm driving the bus today.
Well, so, and you're one of our very favorite people right now, because it is not often that somebody releases a 558-page book and somebody sits down and says less than a week later, I finished reading it. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time. And that's one of the things we always talk about in sort of the authorship world, right? Is that, people always ask, like, when they price a book, like, will people pay $30, $20, $40, whatever for a book? And I always tell people, I'm like, it's not about will they pay for it. It's will they give you 8, 10, 15, 20 hours of their time. That's what's really valuable. And I think Joe and I have really begun to feel the gratitude for that just in this first week since the book released, with how many very busy, very important, brilliant people have carved out time in their schedule to sit down and start reading or finish reading, as in your case. Thank you.
Right. And one of the things that we should say is, yes, the book looks to be long. It's over 500 pages. But that said, it's a pretty easy read, especially for insiders in higher ed. And of course, I was very interested because I talked about many of the things that are in the book on my own podcast, and I have blogged earlier in my career. And so it was very interesting for me to see this. And I've also had the opportunity to participate in several of the interviews on this podcast. But enough about me. Let's talk about Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education. Today, I want to do some fairly high-level stuff, about the book. And then if we agree that we want to do more, we'll delve into some of the more specifics. But let's start with commencement. I've done dozens of commencements in my career with the University of Phoenix. And people are always surprised when I talk to them about commencement, because students often think of it as the end of something. And in fact, I have to explain to them it's not. So, what is it the beginning of, folks? Joe?
Well, you know what? I can't remember. I think Kate, I think you said commencement was the title, and we were, when you look at the pandemic and you look at post-pandemic and you look at the conversations that we had on the EdUp Experience podcast from pre-pandemic all the way through that point to where we got, it was, higher ed isn't something new or needs to be something new. And commencement was the most appropriate term to say, yes, something has ended. The higher education of old has ended, and the pandemic unveiled why higher education needs to advance faster than it has. That means a new beginning is upon us, or at least those of us that are willing to accept that a new beginning is upon us. And that's why we felt commencement was the most appropriate title, because Bill, and you know this better than anybody, the financial model is broken. Student enrollment cliff is still coming, COVID or no COVID, because of declining birth rates. Online education was very confusing there during the pandemic, the difference between emergency response, remote learning, and true designed online education. And so it's the beginning of thinking differently, we think. But we could be wrong. And I think this book will make you see both sides and, almost have internal arguments within yourself along the way. And I think that's where it came from, Bill.
Okay. Kate?
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that, one of the things when we were thinking about titling the book is we wanted to make sure that we didn't do that sort of cliche sort of old thing that a lot of academic books have done, where they've used metaphors that only apply to certain parts of the sector, right? So we didn't want a title that evoked images of a flowering quad and brick buildings, because not all learning happens that way. Not all institutions even sort of live on a campus physically anymore. And so we really thought about what is the one thing that all post-secondary education institutions have in common, and most of them have some sort of celebration at the end of the learning. And we also wanted to honor the fact that higher education, colleges and universities around the world, what they do is they focus on beginnings and ends, right? You matriculate into a program, you start or finish an academic term, you survive finals week, you cross a finish line in terms of a service learning project or thesis or comps or dissertation, you transfer to the next program. It's always about sort of that next step. And we also spend a lot of time in this book talking about a new way of consuming higher education in terms of learners who come in, get a certain credential, step back out, go pursue part of their career, change their job, come back to higher education to help sort of level them up again. And this whole idea of starting and stopping and starting and stopping and sort of beginnings and ends in a more fluid way, I think really highlights what's happening in the industry right now in a way that we're excited about. And so, yeah, we loved Commencement as the title for this book, and we hope our readers do too.
Great. Well, let's talk about consuming the book, since you brought it up, Kate. You have a wide audience to this podcast all over the world and all kinds of different people. Who should read this book?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say, the book was written primarily for an audience of people who work in and for or around higher education. So if you work at a college or university, whether you're an executive, a faculty member, a director of enrollment, a manager in the alumni relations office, anywhere you work up, down, or across a college or university, you are going to find large swaths of this book are for you. But we also wanted this book to resonate with people who serve higher education. So maybe you're a K-12 superintendent and you work really closely with a local community college because of your sort of dual enrollment programs, or maybe you are an ed tech consultant, or you know, an alumni relations or fundraising consultants, and higher education is your space that you serve. And we wanted everyone who cares about higher education and gives a portion of their sort of work and love to higher education to find themselves in this book. So it's one of the things, someone just asked us yesterday, what makes your book different than other books that are coming out about higher ed? And the difference really is this is not a one topic book. This book is not just about rising tuition or financial aid. It's not a book just about like one piece of the problem or opportunity. It's about taking a broad look at where we've been in higher education, where we are now, and where we're headed. So we also have things in here for the consumer. So if you have a kid or you yourself are about to head off to college, there are some things in here that are really going to resonate. We're already hearing really, really great feedback on our section of the book called 7 Mighty Tips for Choosing the Right College, where we give insider advice about how to do everything from choose which schools to look at all the way to negotiating your tuition.
Yeah. Joe, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree 100% with Kate. I think though this book is, gosh, it's for everyone, right? I mean, if you are thinking about higher education, if you are in higher education, if you're going back to higher education, particularly if you're a business with employees that where you're looking to offer higher education as a benefit, maybe you want to know what universities are doing now and how they're being responsive or not being responsive to what you know, Bill, and I know because we talked about it a million times, like the skilling and reskilling and upskilling and micro credentials, and not who's all in and online, who's not, who understands the headwinds ahead and who doesn't. And I think that's what I would say. I would say it's really for anyone, but particularly employers is one big category of people.
Well, you know, Kate mentioned that this is a different kind of book for higher education, which is why people should want to read it. And I think, Joe, you followed up on that very nicely. But let me do a little bit of commentary as we go into the next part, because, you know, that's what I do, is provide commentary. What really makes this book different is that it's not highfalutin. You know, there's no filter in this book. It's transparent. Yeah. It's honest. It's primary sources versus secondary. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it means it comes right directly from the mouths of the people who are interviewed. That's primary research. So we're not looking at summaries of what somebody said and trying to put it through a filter of bias or higher ed. And so you won't find a lot of confusing terminology, because as we did these interviews, and certainly in the ones I did, people were very straightforward. And so they, you know, you don't get mired down. And one of the comments that I made is that this is not an academic case study. So what, you know, just really briefly, what do you think the difference is between what you guys have done and the kind of dry case study approach that people often take? Joe?
I'm gonna let Joe jump in on that, and I have some thoughts.
Here's what I'd say, and it's really simple. You know, when you interview so many people with such great insight, and you can get to a point where you can reproduce those exact quotes, those exact moments, the exact insights for an audience through something like a book, you start to realize the brilliance that exists, the power of innovation that's there. But you get it in an organic way, because when you filter and you produce a case study and you summarize information, you take out some of the emotion, you take out some of the passion, and some of these statements in a word for word fashion, you can read the passion. The words are, you can feel the passion through the words, and along with people saying exactly what they want to say. This is what they said. This is why it's great. and it was unfiltered. And they came on the podcast originally knowing that they could say what they wanted to, because this podcast and this book create the opportunity for people who are work inside higher ed to say exactly what they think and not be vilified for it or anything else, which is why I took my moments through the book when writing with Kate to say exactly what I think higher ed professionals always want to say sometimes. Like, I always wanted somebody to say that accreditation is used as a red herring to prevent innovation. If you haven't said it, you've thought it. I said it. Okay, maybe you didn't like that I said it, but you've thought it. Or you've thought that there isn't really that big of a difference between for-profit and nonprofit higher ed. And if you have thought that, you're being kind of elitist in a certain way, and I'm going to call you out. And I wrote it in there that way. And you might think that elite education is, elitism is good for higher ed. And I'm telling you, that's going to become a bad word. And so I think we all think those things, but this gave everybody the opportunity to just say it. Kate?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the candor and I think there was something about the sort of pandemic moment, the fact that the interview started just before the pandemic hit, sort of in January 2020. The fact that a lot of these conversations started with like, how are you? Are you healthy? How's your family? Are you safe? That was interesting because there was an immediate connection, I think, between Joe and Alvin and co-hosts and whatnot. And that, I think, allowed people to really bring their real selves to the microphone. But in terms of how we wrote it, because obviously this book is not just a string of quotes, that would be incredibly boring to read, right? Even though the quotes are brilliant. And I agree, some of them just literally jump off the page, which is why when we designed the book, visually, we actually have what we call meme quotes. There are some quotes that it's just a quote for the whole page, and you could take a picture of it and throw it on LinkedIn and whatnot. And we did that on purpose because these presidents we interviewed were just so brilliant, and what they say often stands alone. But how we stitched it together was really important. And little insider information: when Joe and I first talked about writing this book together, I'm a professional writer by trade and a higher education consultant, and one of the things that was really important that we explored at the beginning of our relationship was, do either of us write in this really stilted, it sounds like you wrote it for your dissertation committee kind of way? Because I wasn't going to write that book, and I didn't want to have to edit that from Joe either. And I was thrilled to find out that on paper, he's just who he is on microphone and in real life. And that he's not afraid to point a finger at what's broken, and he's not afraid to be passionate about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could make these strides forward as an industry, and here's how I think we do that. And so I came from inside higher ed, worked for a lot of places and a lot of quote unquote leaders who would literally clutch their pearls or have heart attacks if they had heard me say some of the things I said in this book. And so in many ways, it was cathartic to write this book. We finally got to say, as Joe said, sort of all the things everyone's been thinking, and hopefully we articulated it well. But that said, you're not going to agree with everything that's in this book. And that's, I think, Bill, you had said to us early on when we gave you a sneak peek, you said, there are things I love. There are things that people are going to love, and there are going to be things in this book that people hate. And that's how you know you did it right. And that was actually quite encouraging to us during the writing process. So thank you for that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we're going to be asking people for the rest of our lives, what did you find useful in this book? And what did you disagree with?
Yeah, one of the pieces of advice I give folks when I'm consulting is, if you find that you've made everybody happy, you've done it wrong, because that's not the way it works. But moving along, we talked about who ought to read this book, but we haven't talked a lot about why they would read it and what they do with it. Now, one of the things that I commented on to Joe the other day was, I think this book is like it's a kaleidoscope. If you keep turning it, you get a different perspective, and the colors change and the patterns change depending on who's talking and where you are. And I think I said in one of my comments to both of you, this is a big think piece. It's sort of like a long op-ed. And so so it's not just to be read, I don't think, and digested and cogitated, but what kinds of uses do you think people would have for this book?
You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
amazing.
Oh gosh. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think,
Go ahead,
yeah,
Kate.
I think that this book, if you're working in or for or around higher education, can, should, and will give you courage as well as evidence. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people who work inside higher ed have been wanting to speak up about a particular issue, and you know how that is, like, it's hard sometimes to do that depending on your relationship with your leaders. But to be able to say, hey, did you hear that this issue that we've been kind of avoiding, this is really figures really large into this book, Commencement, and here's how they explore it. Like, can we talk about that? We actually intend to be doing a lot of guided book clubs and leadership retreats at colleges and universities around the content and the themes in the books. And I think that's going to help people who are making decisions and executing on strategies at colleges and universities to have a safe space to talk about these issues, which is, I think, huge. But the evidence part is really important, right? So we found as the interviews were being conducted that we might think, oh, well, no, there's no such thing as a university where the students earn cryptocurrency to pay down their tuition. Actually, there is such an institution. Or so sometimes when we're trying to innovate in higher education, or even just evolve slowly in higher education, because the industry is so focused on parity, right? You think that you have to look just like the other school down the street because that's what the accrediting folks think, because they show up for your site visit, and if it doesn't look like what they do at their school, they say, whoa, we haven't seen that before, that's not a good idea. So we cookie cutter our way through higher education, and this book gave us an opportunity to talk to 125 college and university presidents who told us stories about how they've developed their curriculum, how they deliver their learning, how they approach wraparound services, what kinds of services they offer to their alumni, et cetera. And so we're excited because we know that people are going to open parts of this book and go, I didn't even know that was possible. And then they're going to take it to their boss or to their board or whoever, the president's cabinet, and say, did you know that this is happening in the industry? And if them, why not us?
Joe?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I would say that, we talk a lot on the podcast. We talked to a lot of leaders, and the theme is change needs to happen. How does it happen? When does it happen? Why does it need to happen? We cover a lot of those issues and topics in the book, so that you can use it like a workbook. That's the way I said this to you, Bill. I said, I feel like it's like a workbook. Like, you'd be taking notes in the margin, and you'd be able to march into a meeting and go, look, there's a school out there doing exactly what Kate just said. They're using cryptocurrency as to pay down student debt. What does that mean? How could we take that concept and do something with it? How can we take rewards programs and implement it? How do we look at M&A as a strategic value add rather than a consequence of bad performance? How? That's how you change industries, right? You got to ask the right questions. And I think this book is really a turning point, in my opinion, for how we need to think forward and not think present.
Yeah, and there's tons of homework, just in case you thought we missed out on that. The book is full of pop quizzes. Joe's sidebars are these moments where they basically just say, why aren't you doing it this way? And allow you to think on that. We've got reflection questions. Our contributor, Elvin Freitas, wrote these really awesome practical sidebars in every chapter. They're like listicles, right? Lists. Yeah. And he walks you through how to do things, whether it's in your enrollment services department and your alumni relations department, and he gives you checklists for how to do things. And so, obviously we care about the copyright protection for this book, but I'm going to be less frustrated and more complimented if I find out that somebody photocopies, one of those lists or what have you, takes it into a meeting and says, we need to be doing this stuff. That's why we did this. We want this book to be kind of a playbook I did have somebody refer to it as the higher education Bible the other day, and I think that was a joke about the size of it. But in terms of, a sort of a touchstone document that people can use at work, heck yes. I sure hope it's covered with tape flags and written all over and photocopied and all those good things.
Yeah, and we certainly don't want to sell Elvin short, because I think his pieces are amazing.
Exactly.
But
I'm having some technology trouble with the buttons today. So
well, I'm
that
not.
might be a little distorted.
Bill's got us covered.
I had a couple of specific recommendations on how people could use this. Number one, it's a textbook. Certainly at the undergraduate level. And I think it's grist for the mills of undergraduate or graduate seminars, for exactly the reason that you said, both of you said, and that is, if you don't want to say it, you can say, well, let's talk about what this other person said. Let's talk about the heresy.
Right.
And, is it
Blame
heresy?
Blame Kate and Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that if I were still in the business, I would definitely have that as on the syllabus for my graduate seminars in particular, because that's where the real challenge lies.
Thank you. In fact, we actually just talked to someone yesterday about, what does it look like for us to start having conversations with, there are some really phenomenal, a Doctor of Education programs, and lots of folks who are inside higher education, sort of who are working their way sort of up that proverbial ladder, who are looking at education sort of leadership degrees. And so there are entire programs all over the country that are maybe sort of cobbling together sort of business leadership texts and, sort of more topical texts about higher ed. But, has there ever been a book quite like this about how to lead in higher ed and how to create change going forward and to sort of kill the sacred cows and embrace new ideas? And so we're certainly hopeful that those programs will be looking at Commencement as a resource for those programs.
Yeah. You're both talking about change, and we're at the beginning of a new era and there's going to be change. So here's the hard question. You can read about it in the book, but how do you drive it? Because it takes more than vision and energy. Amongst other things, it takes money. So, how do we get off the dime on this stuff?
That's a toughie, isn't it? I think there's a balance, right, Bill, between, fiscal responsibility and R&D, right? I mean, we'd all like to R&D everything and create new initiatives and create changes. It takes away the responsibility of managing an effective business, which is, I think, where, and how I feel on this, that higher education and institutions generally don't run like even though they are businesses, aren't run as businesses. And therefore, our product, which is academics, is usually overbuilt. Low enrolled programs, underperforming programs, large expense. And those issues are really hard to tackle for a number of reasons that you could read about in Commencement at the beginning of a new era in higher education, right? Committees and faculty council, faculty senates, and what else? We have a collective bargaining. There's all sorts of reasons why that's prevented. So you have to tackle those big issues in a way that creates space to really innovate. Or you have to do what some institutions do, and they go buy. That's why we reference Arizona and Ashford. They couldn't do what they wanted to develop online within their institution, so they went and bought one. And they buy it, and they've got an online bolt-on, and that's the way they decided to innovate. So innovation can look different for different institutions, but that you've got to tackle those foundational issues, right? We know the business model will remain broken, no matter how much money you have to R&D yourself to prosperity. Like you've got to have a solid hold of the business skills, and you know how I feel about that, Bill, because it's consumer based choice now. So that's what I would say. But it does take money. But you know what? It takes thought. It takes I don't know, it takes energy. Like you said, sometimes it's not about how much money you have or don't have. It's about how hard you can push with the resources you do have, you know?
Yeah, no,
Excellent.
I couldn't agree more. And we understand and we're sensitive to the fact that a lot of our readers might work at, community colleges where enrollment is down by 10% and money's really, really tight right now, or at, small private liberal arts colleges that don't have a big endowment, right? So, will the Princetons of the world, benefit from this book? Yes. And can they afford to execute on all the ideas we have? Yes. But there are plenty of people who don't. And so we do talk about those financial realities. Chapter 8 is called Keeping the Lights On, and it's all about those, like, where does the money come in? How does it come in? Where are we spending too much? And I can say from having worked on the inside, and this is just one example. Obviously, cost control is a good place to sort of free up some cash, but obviously the revenue is another piece of it. But I worked at a medical sciences university as the head of marketing for a long time, and when we had brought on a new president, and he called himself a tyrant, and that wasn't too far from the truth. And he came in and he started looking at the way we were doing things, and he realized that we have a lot of scientists who were conducting very, very expensive research, human subjects research, animal research, and the animal labs are incredibly expensive to maintain, who no longer had any grant funding. There was nothing coming in from the NIH. There was nothing. And so we were using tuition dollars from students to pay for really expensive research projects. And so he started shutting them down. And it was incredibly political and painful. And it was a difficult era for us. And these scientists were heartbroken. But we basically started looking at everyone at the institution who was supposed to be contributing to the education of the students, as well as potentially advancing sort of scientific knowledge, and saying, prove it. Like, go teach really well and advance science. And if you're doing it in a way that's good, you will be able to attract students to pay tuition, and we'll be able to attract grant funding or partnerships with pharma companies or whatnot to be able to do that research. But if it's just sort of keeping yourself busy, like, we can't keep the lights on while we do that. And boy, did we free up a whole lot of money when we shut down a whole lot of scientific studies.
Wow, great. Well, before we wrap up this first episode, I've got a couple of final questions that I'd like to get your input on, and they're not the final questions that you always ask on this podcast.
Shouldn't be on this one. If you want to know what we think about the future of higher education, pick up your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era on higher education on Amazon. Anyway.
Exactly. And like all good textbooks, the answers are on the back.
That's right. But the first is, in 25 words or less, what does the current education landscape look like in America? You've been vagabonds and sort of gone across this landscape. What do you see?
I see. Is that 2?
That's 2.
Does that count?
You have 23 left.
I see. If I say the same 2 words continuously, it's still only 2. We are generally educated without the right general education for the future. And I won't get any examples, but I'll pull on a guest that I had way at the beginning, who was the president of iHeartMedia, that said, I don't care about general education. I need someone that can sell. So give me a class in sales and I'll hire graduates all day long. That's what I see. A coming change in what general education means for the future.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean,
that was 24 words, just for the record.
It was perfect. No, I see an industry in which there is an opportunity to be ambitious in a way we've never been, and to be ruthless in a way we've never been, meaning we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. It's time for higher standards in higher education, and it's time to stop using terms like student-centric when we don't actually put the students first. This takes me by 25 words, but if you read the book, you'll know that I have said my vision for higher education in 3 words is outcomes for everyone. So how do we create access? How does every single person who wants to learn something past high school, which we all do, and we need it different things at different times, how do we serve everyone, and how do we give them measurable, meaningful outcomes? There are ways to do that. This is not an impossible dream. It just takes the will to do it, and to link arms and to make tough decisions and to dismantle old structures and ways of doing things. And so nothing is sacred except a mission to educate learners. That's
I do
it.
want to say though, real fast, Kate, on your behalf too, let's not make the mistake of thinking when we talk about this book, Commencement, and we're talking in these about or giving answers to these questions, that we're thinking about brick and mortar institutions that happen to live in the city where you're standing. We're talking about online, baby. And we're talking about the 39 million adult learners out there with some college no degree, some of the fastest growing institutions in the world, globalization of learning. It is not regional or national anymore. It is truly global. You could study wherever you want for whatever university you want in the world. It changes the game.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there a place for every kind of institution still in the landscape, Bill? I think a lot of people are worried that there's going to become these sort of mega institutions, right? Mega universities, or what happens to the little guys, but what about our vocational or voc tech school, or what about this military academy? All of those institutions have important roles to play. And they can play them differently. And in some instances, they should be playing those roles in partnership with one another. And so I have a reader of the book whose son just started an apprenticeship program in sort of robotics and mechatronics, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of a sort of a vocational program paired with a community college program. And his dad is like, oh, this book is so helpful because it's helping me think about the entire landscape of what learning looks like after grade 12, not just quote unquote higher education. So there's a lot to think about, but Joe's absolutely right. It's not just one definition of what you think higher ed used to be.
And, and that's one of the topics for one of our upcoming continuations of this, is where higher ed stands vis-a-vis society in general, which I think is a fascinating question. But my last question for you in this fascinating episode, which, see what I did there, Joe?
I did.
Okay. Is what is the most important message in this book?
Kate, I'm going to defer to you first. I got to think about that one.
Well, I mean, I think the most important, it's probably the last sentence of the book, is that the beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. The most important message in this book, once we've presented all of the challenges that we face and the different ways to think about them and the ways that folks are innovating at different institutions, and we challenge you to ask yourself these questions, the most important message is that we cannot individually rest on our laurels, whether we work inside a university, we consult to universities, et cetera. We can't sit here and say, gosh, I really wish this industry would change. We have to change. Next time you walk into a meeting with your team, next time you talk to the president at your institution, the next time you do anything, if you continue to speak and act from the old playbook, you're part of the problem. And so we really want people to feel empowered one at a time, and then collectively, once hundreds or thousands of you have all read the book, to be the change that we know that you believe in. So I think the most important message for our readers is empowerment, that they are the ones who are going to take this industry forward on behalf of the students and learners who deserve their very best.
Mine, simple: no students, no higher ed. And if you truly want to grow and you truly want to be relevant and you want to be able to innovate and do all the things you want to do, the student truly has to be the end all be all for your decision making. If it's institutionally based decision making, you'll lose. If you don't look at the higher education as a business, you'll lose. If you don't invest in marketing, you lose. And students are a consumer. And if you're going to meet that consumer where they are and know that the generation of the digital native is already here and coming in a more robust way, you better bring in that tech because there's an expectation. That's what I think we are trying to show at the beginning of a new era, is that it really is.
And that's another topic that we'll take up in one of the next episodes.
No,
that is having the student at the center.
Yep.
Absolutely. And there's a huge chapter 4 of the book is called People Imperative, and folks who are sitting up and listening closely as Joe talks about student-centered, and you're going to love that chapter. And if I can give a mic drop by quoting my co-author, Joe Sallustio, we actually have a big sort of meme quote in the book for one of the most brilliant things that he's ever said, though he says brilliant things every day, all day.
Thank you, Kate.
It's something Joe said while we were working on this book, and it was, education is a business and students are consumers. If you don't understand that, you've already lost.
True enough.
Dang, that is pretty dang good.
I
That-
know, mic
that's-
drop moment there for you, huh?
Probably something I told you, Joe. I'm not sure. But at this point, to wrap up this segment, first of all, I want to thank the two of you for agreeing to do this, and I hope you'll agree to do some more, because what I really want to do in the follow-ups is hit some of the high points, so that if people go through the table of contents, they go, "Oh, that's what that chapter is about."
Yeah,
I
we
really
love it.
need to read it.
Yeah, let's do a whole series. I mean, listen, this thing was born from a podcast, and we should continue growing it and nurturing it in the podcast environment. So thank you, Bill, for agreeing to
thank you, Bill.
interview us.
Appreciate
And we
it.
look
My
forward to the whole
pleasure.
series. Yeah.
My pleasure. And Joe, before I turn the keys back over to you, I just want to thank everyone who's listening for putting up with me for this particular podcast, and for ordering your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, hard copy, Kindle. Get it anywhere books are sold. Joe,
And with that,
take it
ladies and
away.
gentlemen, and with that, please let me thank my co-host, Kate Colbert, and the amazing Dr. Bill Pepicello for being the MC of this episode. You've just EdUp'd. It's time to
Level up.
The beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joe Sallustio, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin